No personal maid ever lasted a full week working for the Savage King Alpha until she showed up. They called him the Savage King, and Mira should have listened to the warnings. Instead, she made a bet with fate itself, that even the most broken heart could learn to love again. She had 7 days to prove it or die trying. Can love really transform a monster, or will it destroy them both? Chapter 1. The Beast Upon the Throne. Alpha King. Aldrich Blackthorn sat upon his obsidian throne like a predator surveying his domain. The great hall of Raven's Hollow Castle stretched before him, its stone walls bearing witness to countless acts of cruelty that had earned him the whispered title of the Savage King. At 32, he ruled through fear alone, his dark eyes cold as winter storms and twice as merciless. The latest trembling maid knelt before him, her shoulders shaking as she awaited judgment for the crime of spilling wine upon his sleeve. Such infractions had cost others their positions, their dignity, and sometimes their lives. Alpha King Aldrich's jaw tightened as he studied her cowering form, feeling the familiar surge of disgust at such weakness. 6 days, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. You lasted 6 days in my service. A paltry improvement over your predecessor. The maid's whimper echoed in the vast chamber, causing several courtiers to shift uncomfortably. They had learned long ago that their king's mercy was as rare as dragon's tears. Rising from his throne with predatory grace, Alpha King Aldrich descended the stone steps slowly, each footfall deliberate and menacing. The assembled nobles watched in fascination and terror, knowing they witnessed the familiar ritual of another servant's destruction. None dared intervene, for they had seen what became of those who challenged the Savage King's wrath. You are dismissed from my service, Alpha King Aldrich declared, his words sealing her fate. Forever. The maid fled the hall in tears, leaving behind only the acrid scent of fear and the king's growing reputation for merciless cruelty. Lord Chancellor Willem approached cautiously, his weathered face grave with concern. Your Majesty, we are running short of women willing to serve as your personal maid. Word of your exacting standards has spread throughout the kingdom. Alpha King Aldrich's lips curved in a cold smile that held no warmth. Then find me another fool willing to try. Chapter 2. The Last Candidate. The castle's servants' quarters buzzed with nervous whispers as news spread through the stone corridors like wildfire. Another maid had fallen victim to Alpha King Aldrich's impossible standards, lasting merely 6 days before being cast out in disgrace. Cook Martha shook her graying head as she kneaded bread with unusual violence, taking out her frustrations on the innocent dough. Mark my words, she muttered to the scullery girls. There ain't a woman left in this kingdom fool enough to serve that demon directly. The girls nodded solemnly, having heard tales of the king's cruelty since childhood. Some spoke of maids who had lasted mere hours before fleeing in terror. In his private study, Lord Chancellor Willem pored over a list that grew shorter with each passing day. The parchment contained names of potential candidates for the king's personal service, but line after line bore the dark ink of refusal. Noble families refused to send their daughters. Common folk had learned to hide theirs when the royal recruiters came calling. Alpha King Aldrich stood at his window, watching the autumn wind strip leaves from the courtyard trees with indifferent brutality. The sight pleased him in its honesty. Nature, at least, made no pretense of gentleness. Behind him, Willem cleared his throat nervously, a sound that had preceded countless unpleasant conversations over the years. Your Majesty, Willem began carefully, I have located one final candidate, a young woman from the border village of Millhaven. He paused, knowing his next words would either intrigue or enrage the king. She volunteered when others refused. Alpha King Aldrich turned slowly, his dark eyes narrowing with interest and suspicion. In his experience, only the desperate or the foolish volunteered to serve him directly. Both categories amused him briefly before boring him to destruction. What manner of woman volunteers for certain failure? Alpha King Aldrich asked, his voice carrying the dangerous softness that preceded his cruelest moments. Willem consulted his notes. Her name is Mira Ashwood, sire. 23 years of age, unmarried, with references for cheerful disposition. Chapter 3. An Unexpected Arrival. Dawn painted Raven's Hollow Castle in shades of gray and gold as a simple wooden cart approached the imposing gates. The guards, accustomed to the fearful faces of new servants, were surprised to see the young woman seated beside the driver humming a melody that seemed wholly inappropriate for such a grim destination. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and her green eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than terror. Mira Ashwood had traveled for 3 days to reach the castle, but her spirits remained undaunted. While others whispered warnings about the savage king's cruelty, she saw only an opportunity to serve and perhaps understand the man behind the fearsome reputation. Her village priest had taught her that every soul possessed some spark of goodness, no matter how deeply buried. The cart driver, Thomas, cast nervous glances at his passenger. "Last chance to turn back, miss," he urged. "Ain't no shame in admitting this fool's errand for what it is." But Mira simply smiled and gathered her modest belongings. A single worn bag containing her few possessions and her mother's recipe book. "Everyone deserves kindness, Thomas," she replied gently. "Perhaps His Majesty has simply forgotten what it feels like to receive any." The driver shook his head, certain he was delivering an innocent lamb to slaughter. He had seen too many hopeful faces leave this castle as broken spirits. Within the castle walls, preparations for the new maid's arrival proceeded with grim efficiency. The servants moved through their duties with practiced silence, knowing that any disturbance might draw their volatile king's attention. They had learned to become invisible in his presence, ghosts haunting their own home. Alpha King Aldrich himself remained in his chambers, deliberately indifferent to the proceedings below. New servants meant nothing to him. They were temporary inconveniences at best, sources of momentary entertainment at worst. He would break this one as he had broken all the others, maintaining the careful distance that kept him safe from the weakness of human attachment. The castle gates opened with an ominous groan. Chapter 4. First Impressions. The great hall fell silent as Mira Ashwood entered, her simple brown dress a stark contrast to the elaborate tapestries that adorned the stone walls. Unlike her predecessors who had approached the throne with trembling steps and downcast eyes, she walked with quiet confidence, her head held high as she took in the magnificent architecture with genuine appreciation. Alpha King Aldrich studied her from his elevated throne, searching for the telltale signs of fear he had grown to expect. Instead, he found himself oddly unsettled by her steady gaze and serene expression. When their eyes met, she offered a respectful curtsy but did not look away, a small defiance that most would consider suicidal in his presence. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and melodious in the vast chamber. "I am Mira Ashwood, come to serve as your personal maid." The assembled courtiers held their breath, waiting for the king's inevitable display of intimidation. They had witnessed this scene countless times, each ending in tears and terror. Alpha King Aldrich descended from his throne with deliberate slowness, each step echoing ominously through the hall. He moved like a stalking wolf, his dark eyes never leaving her face as he searched for the crack in her composure that would allow him to exploit her weakness. Yet Mira remained steady, watching him approach with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than fear. "Tell me, Mira Ashwood," he said, his voice carrying the dangerous edge that had reduced grown men to stammering children. "What makes you believe you can succeed where others have failed so spectacularly?" He stood close enough now that she could see the cruel intelligence in his dark eyes, the calculated coldness that had earned him his fearsome reputation. Mira considered his question seriously before answering. "Perhaps, Your Majesty, the others were trying to avoid failure rather than seeking success. There is a difference between the two approaches." Her response caught him off guard, its simplicity hiding a wisdom he had not expected from a village girl. For the first time in years, Alpha King Aldrich found himself genuinely curious about another person's thoughts. Chapter 5. Testing Boundaries. Within hours of Mira's arrival, Alpha King Aldrich began his systematic campaign to break her spirit. He summoned her to his chambers at dawn with a list of impossible tasks designed to ensure her failure. The fireplace needed cleaning, but the ashes must not disturb the ancient books nearby. His armor required polishing, but she must not touch the ceremonial sword that lay beside it, a weapon rumored to have tasted noble blood. Mira listened to each instruction with careful attention, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her genuine desire to succeed rather than her fear of failure. This unexpected response unsettled Alpha King Aldrich more than cowering ever could. When faced with his deliberately contradictory orders, she simply smiled and said, "I shall find a way, Your Majesty." As the day progressed, Alpha King Aldrich watched from the shadows as Mira approached each task with innovative solutions. She used bellows to direct ash away from the precious books while cleaning the fireplace. For his armor, she worked section by section, carefully avoiding the forbidden sword while achieving a mirror finish that surpassed his previous maid's efforts. What disturbed him most was her constant humming, soft melodies that filled his chambers with an alien warmth he had not experienced in years. She spoke gently to inanimate objects as she worked, thanking the armor for cooperating and apologizing to furniture she accidentally bumped. Such behavior should have annoyed him, yet he found himself listening for her voice during the brief moments she fell silent. By evening, Alpha King Aldrich was forced to admit that Mira had completed every task successfully. This realization filled him with a mixture of admiration and fury. No servant had ever succeeded so completely at his deliberate sabotage. He stood in his doorway, watching her arrange fresh rushes on the floor, while humming a lullaby his own nurse had sung centuries ago. Or so it seemed. "Your work is adequate," he said curtly, the words feeling strange on his tongue. In truth, her work surpassed adequate by vast measures, but he would not grant her the satisfaction of praise. Mira looked up with genuine pleasure at his grudging acknowledgement. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Tomorrow I shall strive to do even better." Chapter 6. Unexpected Resistance. Alpha King Aldrich spent a restless night planning increasingly difficult challenges for his persistently cheerful maid. If straightforward, impossible tasks could not break her, perhaps he needed to employ more psychological warfare. He would test not just her competence, but her moral flexibility. Surely every person had a line they would not cross. The next morning, he summoned Mira with his most intimidating glare. "Today you will reorganize my private library," he commanded, gesturing toward the towering shelves that contained centuries of accumulated knowledge. "However, you will burn any books you deem unworthy of a king's collection." The order was designed to horrify any person of learning, forcing her to either destroy precious knowledge or disobey a direct command. Mira's face showed genuine distress for the first time since her arrival, but not for the reasons Alpha King Aldrich expected. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "I confess I cannot read well enough to judge which books are worthy of your magnificent collection. Perhaps you could guide me in identifying those you no longer value?" Her response turned his trap against itself. Rather than forcing her to choose between destruction and disobedience, she had placed the responsibility back upon him while revealing her own limitations without shame. Alpha King Aldrich found himself grudgingly impressed by her tactical intelligence disguised as humble confession. "You cannot read?" he asked, his curiosity overriding his plan to intimidate. In his world, illiteracy was common among servants, but something about Mira suggested depths he had not yet explored. Her speech patterns and bearing suggested education beyond her station. "I know my letters and simple words," Mira replied honestly. "My father taught me to read receipts and ledgers for his trade, but nothing so grand as the volumes in your collection." She gestured toward the leather-bound treasures with obvious reverence. "They are far too beautiful and important for someone like me to judge." Alpha King Aldrich stood silent for a long moment, his original plan crumbling. How could he force her to destroy books when she had already admitted her unworthiness to judge them? Her honesty had disarmed his cruelty more effectively than any clever argument. "Clean the shelves," he said finally. "Leave the books untouched." Chapter 7. Cracks in the Armor. As days passed, Alpha King Aldrich found his carefully constructed routines disrupted by Mira's presence. She arrived each morning with the sunrise, her soft humming drifting through his chambers like an unwelcome warmth. Unlike previous maids who had cowered and stammered, she moved through her duties with quiet confidence, occasionally offering observations that revealed an unexpected depth of thought. "Your Majesty has excellent taste in art," she commented while dusting an ancient tapestry depicting a pastoral scene. "This piece shows such love for simple beauty, meadows and streams rather than battles and conquest." Her words carried no judgment, merely appreciation, yet they struck him like physical blows. That tapestry had belonged to his mother, one of the few possessions he had preserved from his childhood. Alpha King Aldrich's response was immediate and harsh. "You forget yourself, girl. I did not give you permission to comment on my possessions." But even as the words left his mouth, he recognized them as reflexive cruelty rather than genuine anger. Mira's observation had touched something he had thought safely buried beneath years of calculated brutality. Rather than retreating in tears, Mira simply nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty." I spoke out of turn. Yet she continued her work with the same gentle care, her actions suggesting she understood his rebuke as self-protection rather than true displeasure. This perception unsettled him more than open defiance would have. That evening, Alpha King Aldrich found himself standing before the same tapestry, remembering his mother's voice as she had described the scenes within it. Mira's words echoed in his memory. Such love for simple beauty. When had he last acknowledged beauty for its own sake, rather than as a symbol of power? When had he allowed himself to love anything simple? The questions plagued him through another sleepless night. Mira had been in his service for nearly a week, longer than most, and yet she showed no signs of the fear or desperation he had come to expect. Instead, she seemed to grow more comfortable in his presence, treating him with respectful warmth that felt dangerously close to kindness. He would need to escalate his efforts to drive her away before she worked her way any deeper under his carefully constructed defenses. Chapter 8. The Test of Cruelty. Determined to shatter Mira's persistent optimism, Alpha King Aldrich devised what he considered his ultimate test. He would force her to witness his cruelty firsthand, to see the monster he truly was beneath any facade of nobility. Surely no decent person could maintain their sunny disposition after seeing him at his worst. He ordered a young page brought before him on fabricated charges of theft, intending to deliver a harsh punishment while Mira watched. The boy trembled as guards dragged him into the king's private chambers, his face pale with terror. Alpha King Aldrich felt his familiar satisfaction at the sight of fear, the confirmation of his power over others. "This boy has stolen from the royal kitchens," Alpha King Aldrich announced, though no such theft had occurred. "What punishment would you suggest, Mira?" He watched her face carefully, waiting for horror to replace her usual compassion. Surely she would recoil from participating in his cruelty. But Mira studied the terrified page with thoughtful concern rather than judgment. "He looks very thin, Your Majesty," she observed quietly. Perhaps he was hungry rather than greedy. Her gentle words struck the boy like a lifeline, and he looked at her with desperate gratitude. Alpha King Aldrich felt his plan backfiring spectacularly. Instead of forcing Mira to witness his brutality, her presence was making him question his own actions. When had he last considered whether hunger might drive theft? When had he last looked at a servant and seen a fellow human, rather than a tool for his use? "Hunger excuses nothing," he said harshly, but the words felt hollow even to him. The page's thin frame and worn clothes told a story of genuine need that Alpha King Aldrich had chosen to ignore in favor of his demonstration of power. Mira nodded respectfully but continued to regard the boy with obvious sympathy. "Of course, Your Majesty, though perhaps mercy might serve your kingdom better than punishment in this case." Her suggestion was offered without judgment, merely as an alternative perspective. For the first time in years, Alpha King Aldrich found himself reconsidering a decision based on another person's gentle guidance, rather than his own iron will. Chapter 9. An Unwanted Memory Alpha King. Aldrich dismissed the page with a warning instead of punishment, a decision that left him deeply unsettled. As Mira quietly resumed her duties, humming a melody that seemed to mock his confusion, he found himself remembering another voice from long ago, his mother's gentle guidance when he had been cruel to servants as a child. A true king protects those who cannot protect themselves, Queen Isabella had told her young son after catching him tormenting a stable boy. Strength should serve justice, not feed pride. Her words had shaped his early years until betrayal and loss had taught him that kindness was merely weakness dressed in pretty clothing. Now, watching Mira work with the same gentle efficiency his mother had possessed, Alpha King Aldrich felt those buried teachings stirring like ghosts in his chest. When had he last protected the innocent instead of punishing them? When had his strength served anything beyond his own bitter satisfaction? "Your Majesty seems troubled," Mira observed softly, her perceptive green eyes noting his dark mood. "Perhaps fresh air would help. The gardens are particularly beautiful this time of year." Her suggestion was offered without presumption, merely as one human caring for another's well-being. Alpha King Aldrich's first instinct was to snarl at her presumption, to remind her that kings did not seek comfort from servants. But something in her gentle tone stopped him. When had anyone last cared about his well-being without ulterior motives? When had someone offered him comfort without expecting reward? "I have no time for gardens," he said curtly, but the words lacked his usual venom. The truth was that he had not walked in his gardens for years, finding no pleasure in beauty when his heart remained frozen in permanent winter. Mira simply nodded and returned to her work, but Alpha King Aldrich caught her glancing toward the window where autumn sunlight painted the stone walls in shades of gold. Her expression held a wistfulness that suggested she understood the cost of cutting oneself off from simple pleasures. That evening, despite his protests, Alpha King Aldrich found himself standing at his window, gazing down at the gardens he had abandoned to wildness and wondering what they might look like through Mira's appreciative eyes. Chapter 10. The Weight of Reputation. Word of the king's strange mercy toward the accused page spread through the castle like wildfire, carrying on the worried whispers of servants who had grown accustomed to his predictable cruelty. In the kitchens, Cook Martha shook her head in bewilderment while preparing the evening meal. Such behavior was so unlike their volatile monarch that some wondered if he had taken ill. Lord Chancellor Willem approached Alpha King Aldrich in his study that evening, his weathered face creased with concern. "Your Majesty, there are rumors among the staff about your altered disposition. Some fear you may be under some influence." His words carried careful diplomacy, but his meaning was clear. The court had noticed changes they could not explain. Alpha King Aldrich's jaw tightened as he recognized the implications. His reputation for savage unpredictability had kept enemies at bay for years. If he appeared weak or influenced, vultures would circle his throne with renewed hunger. Lady Vivian Ashford, in particular, had been seeking opportunities to expand her family's influence at court. "Summon the guards," Alpha King Aldrich commanded harshly, his voice returning to its familiar edge of menace. "I will remind the castle exactly what manner of king they serve." Yet even as he spoke the words, he felt a strange reluctance to return to his old patterns of intimidation and fear. In her small chamber, Mira prepared for sleep, unaware of the storm brewing around her presence. She had spent the day not only attending to her duties, but also helping the young page who had escaped punishment. The boy's gratitude had touched her heart, confirming her belief that kindness could indeed influence even the hardest souls. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the noble quarters, Lady Vivian Ashford received reports from her network of informants with growing interest. If the savage king was indeed softening, perhaps the time had come to position herself as the power behind his throne. A weak king could be manipulated, a cruel one merely endured. The Game of Thrones was shifting, and Mira remained blissfully unaware that her simple acts of kindness had set larger forces in motion. By morning, the careful balance of power within Ravenshollow Castle would begin to unravel. Chapter 11. The Return of the Beast. Dawn brought no gentle humming to Alpha King Aldrich's chambers. Instead, he summoned the castle guard and delivered a brutal tongue-lashing that echoed through the corridors like thunder. His voice carried its old menace as he berated them for imagined failures, his eyes blazing with manufactured fury designed to remind everyone of his dangerous nature. Mira arrived for her duties to find the king pacing his chambers like a caged wolf, his dark mood filling the room with tension thick enough to choke on. She set about her work quietly, sensing the storm that raged within him, but unable to understand its source. Her usual humming died in her throat as she recognized his need for silence. "You move too slowly," Alpha King Aldrich snapped when she carefully dusted his collection of ancient weapons. "Must I teach you efficiency as well as respect?" His words were chosen to wound, to drive her away before her presence could soften him further. The court was watching, waiting for signs of weakness they could exploit. For the first time since her arrival, Mira's hands trembled slightly as she continued her work. She had sensed kindness beneath his harsh exterior, but now wondered if she had been foolishly naive. Perhaps the others had been right to fear him. Perhaps there was nothing redeemable in the Savage King after all. Yet something in his eyes betrayed the performance. Beneath the calculated cruelty, she glimpsed the same pain she had seen in wounded animals, the desperate fear of a creature that had learned to bite before it could be hurt. This recognition made her continue working despite her fear, her movements careful and respectful. Alpha King Aldrich watched her struggle to maintain composure and felt a twisted satisfaction at finally cracking her cheerful facade. But the victory tasted like ashes in his mouth. He had spent years perfecting the art of breaking spirits. Yet this felt different, like destroying something precious rather than eliminating a threat. By evening, the castle buzzed with renewed fear, and Alpha King Aldrich's reputation as the Savage King seemed restored. But in the darkness of his chambers, he found no peace in his success. Chapter 12. Lady Vivian's Gambit. Lady Vivian Ashford glided through the castle corridors like a serpent in silk, her beauty matched only by her ambition. At 28, she had survived 2 husbands and accumulated considerable wealth, but her true prize remained elusive: influence over the kingdom's most powerful man. The Savage King had resisted all attempts at manipulation, but recent changes suggested new opportunities. She observed Mira from the shadows, noting the young woman's obvious distress after the king's harsh treatment. Here was the source of his temporary softness, a peasant girl whose simple kindness had somehow reached through his armor of cruelty. Such weakness could be exploited, turned into a weapon against both the girl and the king. "How refreshing to see a maid who takes her duties so seriously," Vivian purred, approaching Mira in the servants' corridor. Her voice dripped with false sympathy as she studied the girl's red-rimmed eyes. "His Majesty can be challenging to serve. I do hope you won't let one difficult day discourage you from your noble calling." Mira curtsied respectfully, unsure why such an elegant lady would speak to a mere servant. "Lady Ashford, isn't it? I am honored by your attention." Her natural politeness masked her instinctive wariness of the woman's predatory smile and calculating gaze. Vivian's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, my dear, we women must support each other in this harsh world of men and their moods. Perhaps I could offer some guidance? I've known His Majesty for many years and understand his particular needs." Her offer seemed generous, but something in her tone suggested hidden daggers. "That is very kind," Mira replied carefully. "But I believe every person deserves to be understood on their own terms, rather than through another's perspective." Her diplomatic response revealed wisdom beyond her station, causing Vivian's eyes to narrow with interest. The lady's smile grew sharper. How admirably naive. Youth sees the world in such simple terms, doesn't it? She moved closer, her perfume cloying in the narrow corridor. "But perhaps you'll come to appreciate guidance when innocence proves insufficient protection against royal displeasure." As Vivian swept away, Mira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the castle's stone walls. Chapter 13. Dangerous Games, Alpha King. Aldrich found no satisfaction in his return to familiar cruelty. The fear in servants' eyes, once a source of bitter pleasure, now felt hollow and meaningless. He caught himself listening for Mira's humming throughout the day, only to remember that his harsh words had silenced her gentle songs. The victory he had sought felt increasingly like defeat. In his private study, he attempted to focus on matters of state, but his mind wandered to Mira's words about the hungry page. When had his justice become so divorced from mercy? When had strength become indistinguishable from tyranny? The questions plagued him like physical wounds that refused to heal. Meanwhile, Lady Vivian began implementing her plan with surgical precision. She arranged casual encounters with Mira, offering friendship while subtly undermining the girl's confidence. Her comments were carefully crafted to plant seeds of doubt about the king's character and her own safety within the castle walls. Such a lovely girl shouldn't have to endure royal displeasure alone, Vivian confided to other ladies at court, her voice pitched to carry just far enough. Though I suppose some people invite trouble through their naive presumptions. The poisoned words spread through the noble quarters like infection, creating whispers that would eventually reach the king's ears. Mira, unaware of the webs being spun around her, continued her duties with quiet determination. She had glimpsed something worth saving in the king's tortured soul and refused to abandon hope despite his cruel treatment. Her resolve was tested when she discovered a hidden portrait in his chambers, a painting of a gentlewoman who could only be his mother. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable, the same dark eyes softened by compassion rather than hardened by betrayal. In the woman's painted smile, Mira saw echoes of the kindness she sensed buried within the king. This discovery strengthened her conviction that his cruelty was learned rather than inherent. That evening, as she prepared to leave his chambers, Mira made a decision that would either save them both or destroy her completely. She would not give up on the wounded man behind the savage crown. Chapter 14. A Moment of Truth. Alpha King. Aldrich dismissed his counsel early, claiming fatigue but actually seeking solitude to wrestle with the unfamiliar emotions Mira had awakened. He stood before the fire in his private chambers, watching flames dance in patterns that reminded him of her gentle movements. The realization that a peasant girl had affected him so deeply filled him with equal parts wonder and terror. When Mira arrived for her evening duties, she found him standing motionless, his shoulders bearing the weight of invisible burdens. Instead of beginning her work immediately, she approached him with careful steps, her heart aching for the pain she sensed within him. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "may I speak freely?" Her question hung in the air like a prayer, offering him the choice to maintain distance or risk vulnerability. Everything about her posture suggested gentle concern rather than presumption or pity. Alpha King Aldrich turned slowly, his dark eyes searching her face for signs of the fear he had worked so hard to instill. Instead, he found only compassion and stubborn determination that refused to be intimidated by his reputation. Something within his chest cracked at the sight of such unwavering kindness. "Speak," he commanded, though his voice lacked its usual edge. He braced himself for platitudes or attempts at manipulation, the tools others had used to try reaching him. What he received instead shattered his carefully constructed defenses completely. "I think you are tired of being afraid," Mira said simply, her green eyes holding his without flinching. "Tired of pushing people away before they can hurt you. Tired of wearing cruelty like armor when your heart yearns for something softer." Her words struck him like physical blows, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. Alpha King Aldrich felt his breath catch as she continued. "I see the man you could be when you think no one is watching, the one who hesitates before delivering harsh judgments, who keeps his mother's portrait hidden where others cannot mock his sentiment." Her observation about the portrait made him realize she had seen more than he intended to reveal. For a moment that stretched into eternity, king and servant stood locked in silent communion. two souls recognizing each other across the vast divide of rank and expectation. Chapter 15. The Cost of Caring. The silence stretched between them until Alpha King Aldrich felt something fundamental shift within his chest, the ice around his heart developing its first hairline crack in 20 years. Mira's words had found their target with devastating precision, stripping away layers of protective cynicism to expose the wounded boy still hiding inside the savage king. "You presume much," he said finally, but his voice carried wonder rather than anger. No one had dared speak to him with such directness since his mother's death. No one had looked past his fearsome reputation to see the pain that drove his cruelty. The experience left him feeling exposed and strangely relieved simultaneously. Mira took a careful step closer, her hands clasped before her in an attitude of respectful determination. "Perhaps, Your Majesty. But someone must care enough about your well-being to risk your displeasure. A king who has no one willing to speak truth to him is the loneliest man in his kingdom." Her words struck him like a sword through unprotected flesh. When had anyone last cared about his well-being without seeking advantage? When had someone risked his anger for his own benefit rather than their gain? The novelty of genuine concern left him speechless. "Why?" he asked, the single word carrying years of accumulated pain and suspicion. "What do you gain from such presumption? What reward do you seek for your bold counsel?" He searched her face for signs of calculation or hidden agenda, finding only honest compassion that made no demands. Mira's smile was sad and beautiful in the firelight. "I gain nothing, Your Majesty, except perhaps the knowledge that I tried to ease another's pain. Is that not reason enough?" Her answer revealed a generosity of spirit that belonged to fairy tales rather than the harsh realities of court life. Alpha King Aldrich stared at her in amazement, recognizing something he had thought extinct in his world: selfless kindness offered without expectation of return. The realization terrified him more than any army he had ever faced, for it threatened the very foundations of his carefully constructed isolation. In the shadows beyond his chambers, Lady Vivian's spies listened with growing alarm to this unprecedented exchange between king and servant. Chapter 16. Whispers in the Dark. Lady Vivian received reports of the king's private conversation with growing satisfaction. Here was the ammunition she needed to destroy both the presumptuous maid and the king's emerging weakness. A servant speaking so boldly to royalty could be painted as treasonous insubordination, while the king's tolerance of such behavior revealed dangerous softness. She spent the night crafting her strategy with the patience of a spider weaving its web. By morning, carefully chosen words would spread through the castle, planting seeds of doubt about the maid's influence and the king's judgment. The beauty of her plan lay in its foundation of truth. Mira had indeed spoken boldly, and the king had indeed tolerated it. Meanwhile, Alpha King Aldrich paced his chambers like a caged beast, unable to sleep after Mira's devastating honesty. Her words echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront truths he had spent years avoiding. Was he truly tired of being afraid? Had his cruelty become mere habit rather than necessary protection? He found himself standing before his mother's hidden portrait, studying the gentle wisdom in her painted eyes. Queen Isabella had ruled through love rather than fear, building loyalty that outlasted her brief reign. Her assassination had taught young Alpha King Aldrich that goodness was weakness, that only the ruthless survived. Yet Mira's fearless compassion suggested another possibility. In her modest chamber, Mira lay awake wondering if she had overstepped beyond forgiveness. Her words had poured out unbidden, driven by an overwhelming need to reach the wounded soul she glimpsed behind his savage reputation. Whether he would punish her boldness or consider her message remained to be seen. As dawn approached, each player in this deadly game prepared for the day that would determine all their fates. Vivian sharpened her weapons of whispered poison. Alpha King Aldrich wrestled with emotions he had thought safely buried, and Mira prayed for wisdom to navigate the dangerous waters she had entered. The castle stirred to life, unaware that the balance of power hung by the slenderest of threads, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. In the coming hours, Words would prove as deadly as any blade. Chapter 17. The Poison Spreads. Lady Vivian struck with the precision of a master assassin, her poison disguised as concerned whispers shared between trusted confidants. Over breakfast in the noble quarters, she spoke of troubling rumors about the king's health and judgment, carefully avoiding direct accusations while implanting devastating suggestions. One can only wonder what manner of influence might cause such dramatic changes in His Majesty's behavior, she murmured to Lady Catherine, ensuring her words carried to nearby ears. Though I'm sure there's an innocent explanation for his sudden tolerance of peasant presumption. The whispers spread like wildfire through the castle's social hierarchy. By mid-morning, servants spoke in hushed tones about their king's possible enchantment, while nobles debated whether his apparent softness represented opportunity or danger. Fear and uncertainty replaced the predictable terror that had previously ruled Ravenshollow. Alpha King Aldrich noticed the change immediately upon entering his great hall. Conversations died more abruptly than usual, replaced by furtive glances and nervous shifting. The quality of the silence felt different, charged with speculation rather than simple fear. His years of ruling through intimidation had taught him to read such atmospheric shifts with deadly accuracy. Lord Chancellor Willem approached with obvious reluctance, his weathered face grave with concern. Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss certain rumors that have begun circulating regarding your recent conduct. His diplomatic phrasing could not disguise the serious nature of whatever he had heard. What rumors? Alpha King Aldrich demanded, though he suspected he already knew. His moment of vulnerability with Mira had created weakness his enemies could exploit. The savage king could afford no softness, no human connection that might be turned against him. Willem glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. There is talk of unnatural influence, sire. Some suggest your maid possesses unusual power over your judgment. The accusation hung between them like a sword, promising destruction for all involved. Alpha King Aldrich felt familiar rage building in his chest, but beneath it lay something new, a protective fury directed not at his own exposure but at the threat to Mira. The realization that he cared more about her safety than his reputation shocked him into momentary silence. Chapter 18. A King's Dilemma. Alpha King. Aldrich dismissed Willem with harsh words designed to end speculation about his judgment, but privately he seethed with the knowledge that his enemies had found their target. They could not attack him directly, so they would destroy the source of his perceived weakness. Mira's life hung in the balance of political games she neither understood nor deserved. He summoned her to his chambers with barely controlled urgency, needing to warn her without revealing the depth of his concern. When she arrived with her usual quiet grace, he struggled to find words that would convey danger without exposing his own vulnerability to the spies he knew were listening. There has been talk, he said carefully, his voice carrying its old edge of menace for the benefit of hidden ears. Court gossips amuse themselves with speculation about your influence over royal decisions. Such talk is dangerous for lowly servants who forget their place. Mira paled as she grasped the implications, her quick intelligence recognizing the threat beneath his warning. I understand, Your Majesty. I have overstepped my bounds and endangered us both through my presumption. Her acceptance of responsibility revealed wisdom beyond her years and station. Alpha King Aldrich wanted to tell her that she had done nothing wrong, that her courage in speaking the truth had been a gift rather than a transgression. Instead, he forced cruelty into his voice while his eyes attempted to convey what his words could not. You will remember your place in future. Servants who forget themselves often find their service permanently concluded. The threat was necessary theater, but it tasted like poison on his tongue. He watched pain flicker across her features and hated himself for causing it, even in service of her protection. The cost of keeping her safe was becoming the destruction of everything beautiful between them. Of course, Your Majesty, Mira replied quietly, her voice steady despite the hurt in her eyes. I shall endeavor to serve more appropriately. She curtsied with perfect formality, but something vital had dimmed in her expression, the fearless warmth that had drawn him like a moth to flame. As she resumed her duties with mechanical precision, Alpha King Aldrich felt the return of familiar isolation closing around him like a tomb. Chapter 19. The web tightens. Lady Vivienne watched the king's public rebuke of his maid with satisfaction, though she recognized it as mere performance rather than genuine displeasure. The careful observer could see protective warning beneath his harsh words, confirming that the girl's influence remained dangerous. More decisive action would be required to eliminate this threat to her plans. She arranged another chance encounter with Mira in the castle corridors, approaching with false sympathy and offers of friendship. "My dear child, you look positively stricken. His Majesty's moods can be so unpredictable, can't they?" Her voice dripped with manufactured compassion, designed to lower the girl's defenses. Mira managed a weak smile, still reeling from the morning's harsh reminder of her precarious position. "His Majesty has been most patient with my inadequacies. I am grateful for his guidance in proper conduct." Her diplomatic response revealed intelligence, but also vulnerability that Vivienne could exploit. "Such loyalty is admirable," Vivienne purred, moving closer with predatory grace. Though one wonders if such devotion is appreciated by its object. Kings, after all, are not known for rewarding sentiment with anything more substantial than temporary amusement. Her words were calculated to plant seeds of doubt about the king's intentions. The poison found its mark. Mira's face showed a flicker of uncertainty as she considered whether her feelings for the king were based on genuine connection or naive delusion. Perhaps she had indeed misread his character, seeing kindness where only calculation existed. Vivienne pressed her advantage. "I only mention this out of concern for your well-being, dear. It would be tragic if your natural compassion led you into situations beyond your understanding." Her implication was clear. Royal favor was fickle, and servants who presumed too much often paid with their lives. As the lady glided away, Mira stood alone in the corridor, grappling with new fears. Had she been foolish to believe in the king's hidden goodness? Was her growing affection for him merely the delusion of a lonely girl desperate for connection? The questions tormented her as Vivienne had intended, weakening her resolve at the moment she most needed strength. Chapter 20. Hearts Under Siege, Alpha King. Aldrich noticed the change in Mira immediately. The way her movements had become stilted, her humming silenced completely. The warm light in her eyes had dimmed to cautious respect, and her presence no longer filled his chambers with gentle life. He recognized the symptoms of a spirit under attack and felt murderous rage toward whoever had wounded her. Yet he could offer no comfort without confirming the rumors about her influence over him. Every instinct screamed at him to protect her, to pull her close and promise that no harm would touch her while he drew breath. Instead, he was forced to maintain a cold distance while watching her suffer alone. During his evening meal, Alpha King Aldrich barely tasted the food as he observed Mira's careful movements around his chambers. She performed her duties with mechanical precision, but gone was the joy she had taken in small things. The pleasure of arranging flowers, the satisfaction of restoring beauty to neglected spaces. Someone had convinced her that such happiness was dangerous. "You are unusually quiet tonight," he said carefully, needing to hear her voice even if their conversation must remain formal. The silence between them felt like a living thing, heavy with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Mira paused in her work, her hands stilling on the tapestry she was straightening. "I am endeavoring to serve more appropriately, Your Majesty, as you instructed." Her tone was respectful but empty, lacking the warmth that had made their previous conversations feel like sanctuary from the coldness of court. Alpha King Aldrich set down his wine cup with more force than necessary, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. He wanted to demand who had stolen her light, to promise vengeance against anyone who had made her doubt her worth. Instead, he forced indifference into his voice. "Appropriate service requires no conversation," he said, each word feeling like swallowing glass. "Continue your duties." The command was necessary to maintain their facade, but it felt like driving a dagger into his own chest. As Mira returned to her work in wounded silence, Alpha King Aldrich faced the terrible realization that protecting her might require destroying the very connection that made her worth protecting. Chapter 21. The final gambit Lady Vivienne decided the time had come for her masterstroke. Subtle manipulation had weakened both king and maid, but stronger measures were needed to eliminate the threat permanently. She arranged a private audience with Alpha King Aldrich, arriving in his chambers dressed to emphasize both her beauty and her noble status. "Your Majesty," she began with a graceful curtsy, "I come to you out of loyalty to the crown and concern for the kingdom's stability." Her opening established herself as a devoted subject rather than scheming noblewoman, though her true intentions lay hidden beneath diplomatic courtesy. Alpha King Aldrich received her with cold formality, recognizing a predator despite her elegant facade. "Speak your concerns, Lady Ashford." His tone warned that she had little time to make her case before being dismissed. Vivienne produced a collection of carefully crafted documents, forged letters purporting to show communication between Mira and agents of neighboring kingdoms. The fabrications were masterful, suggesting that the maid was a spy gathering intelligence about the king's private habits and emotional vulnerabilities. "These were discovered among her possessions," Vivienne lied smoothly, watching Alpha King Aldrich's face for signs of the rage she expected. "It appears your charitable instincts have been exploited by those who would harm the realm through intimate knowledge of your person." But Alpha King Aldrich's reaction surprised her. Instead of exploding into fury, he studied the documents with calculating coldness, recognizing immediately that they were forgeries. The papers were too clean, the ink too fresh, the phrasing too sophisticated for a village girl with limited education. Yet their very existence revealed the danger Mira faced. "Interesting," he said quietly, his voice carrying deadly calm. "Tell me, Lady Ashford, how did these documents come to be in your possession?" His question was a trap, designed to expose her role in their creation. Vivienne felt the first stirring of unease as she recognized that her plan was not proceeding as expected. The king's response suggested suspicion rather than gratitude for her revelation. She had underestimated his intelligence, and perhaps his feelings for the maid. The game of cat and mouse had begun in earnest. Chapter 22. Truth and Consequences. Alpha King. Aldrich's penetrating gaze stripped away Lady Vivienne's confident facade as he continued his interrogation. "These documents bear remarkable similarity to correspondence from your own scribes," he observed, producing samples of her previous letters from his files. "The flourishes are nearly identical, suggesting a common source." Vivienne's face paled as she realized her forgeries had been exposed. In her arrogance, she had used her own writing masters to create the false evidence, never imagining the king would notice such details. Her careful plan was crumbling, leaving her exposed to accusations of treason. "Your Majesty surely doesn't suggest," she began, but Alpha King Aldrich cut her off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "I suggest nothing. I state facts." His voice carried the deadly quiet that had preceded countless executions. "You have attempted to manipulate your king through fabricated evidence, endangering an innocent servant in service of your own ambitions. Such actions constitute treason of the highest order." The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Vivienne dropped to her knees, her composure finally shattered as she faced the consequences of her schemes. "Mercy, Your Majesty. I acted only out of concern for the realm's stability." But Alpha King Aldrich had already moved beyond her protestations to consider the larger implications. If Vivienne had gone to such lengths to eliminate Mira, other threats likely existed. His attempt to protect the girl through distance had failed. More decisive action was required. "Guards!" he commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. When armed men appeared, he gestured toward the kneeling noblewoman. "Lady Ashford is to be confined pending investigation into treasonous activities." She is to speak with no one and receive no visitors. As Vivian was dragged away, her cries for mercy echoing through the corridors, Alpha King Aldrich stood alone with the forged documents and the terrible knowledge that his own reputation for savagery had nearly cost him the only person who truly mattered. The time for half measures had passed. It was time to choose between his crown and his heart. Chapter 23. A King's Choice. Alpha King. Aldrich found Mira in the castle gardens at sunset, kneeling beside a neglected rosebush with dirt on her hands and tears on her cheeks. The sight of her gentle care for wounded things broke something inside him that had been holding back a flood of emotion for 20 years. She looked up at his approach with wary respect, the fearless warmth of their early encounters now replaced by careful distance. "Your Majesty," she said, rising quickly and attempting to brush soil from her simple dress. The gardens seemed so lonely, and I thought perhaps—" She stopped herself, remembering his warnings about overstepping her bounds. "You thought they needed care," Alpha King Aldrich finished softly, stepping closer than protocol dictated. "As you thought I needed care when everyone else saw only a monster to be feared or avoided." His words carried wonder rather than anger, as if he was finally understanding something that had long puzzled him. Mira's eyes widened at his gentle tone, so different from the harsh commands of recent days. "Your Majesty, I don't understand," she began, but he silenced her with a raised hand. "Lady Vivian has been arrested for treason," he said simply. "Her attempts to frame you with forged documents revealed both her guilt and my own blindness to the true threat." His admission carried the weight of royal confession, stripping away pretense between them. The relief in Mira's face was quickly followed by confusion. "But the rumors about my influence, surely they remain dangerous to your reputation." Her concern was for his well-being rather than her own safety, confirming everything he had come to believe about her character. Alpha King Aldrich stepped even closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper, meant for her alone. "Let them whisper. I have spent 20 years ruling through fear, building walls to protect myself from betrayal and pain. But you, Mira Ashwood, have shown me that the greatest danger lies not in opening one's heart, but in keeping it forever closed." His confession hung between them like a bridge spanning the chasm of rank and expectation, offering a chance for connection that transcended the boundaries of their separate worlds.